This is one of my favorite pieces. This belongs to Jim Abrams, who has also appeared on the channel. This would be in a very similar to the 1873, but this is actually a model 1884. Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to briefly talk about the history and development of one of the most iconic rifle calibers and now closet pistol calibers ever invented, the .45-70 Government. Lots of people are huge fans of this caliber all over the world. Its stopping power is legendary. In fact, you can actually hunt the African Big Five game animals with it with the proper load and the proper bullet. So, the .45-70 began its life as a military service cartridge in 1873. It was designed to be used in the Springfield Armory 1873 Trapdoor. The .45-70 was going to replace the .50-70, which was in service for a brief period of time after the Civil War. .45-70, of course, is a .45 caliber bullet, and back then using black powder required 70 grains of black powder to make the cartridge run well. Sometimes early on it would be listed as .45-70/405, which meant it carried a 405 grain projectile. I have a couple of modern examples of a 405. This is from S&S projectiles. You'll notice quite lengthy and quite sinister looking. This is more of a home reloaded 405 grain, uncoated, sometimes called a lead head. That cartridge is roughly 2.5 inches long and its maximum overall length is 2.55 inches. It packs a tremendous amount of lethality in that 2.5 inches. Right now, modern cartridges, depending on what they're designed for, say a cowboy action load, moves out at about, 1,200 feet per second, pushing that 405 grain projectile. Awfully impressive. But you can get hunting rounds as well. Hunting rounds generally range from 300 to 325 grains. This one, of course, is a hollow point flat nose from Fiocchi. This is a 325 grain FTX round from Hornady. Kind of a telltale sign is the ballistic tip, of course. But let's return to the days of yesteryear. The United States government wanted to replace the .50-70 with something that was a little faster, a little flatter, and had more penetration. The 1873 was already on the drawing board, and .45-70 seemed to be a logical choice to run that caliber. This is one of my favorite pieces. This belongs to Jim Abrams, who has also appeared on the channel. This would be in a very similar to the 1873, but this is actually a model 1884. Jim estimates it was made sometime around the 1890s and might have been in the Cincinnati militia. It is a single shot, of course, breech loading rifle, and you can tell designed for infantrymen. But just like in modern times, as soon as the military adopts a cartridge or a platform, it notices immediate popularity in the sporting world, which the .45-70 did, certainly. One of the things going on during this same historical period was the massive uptake in buffalo hunting going on in the American West. Millions of these animals were harvested between 1872 and 1873 until they were almost hunted to extinction. The inherent characteristics of the .45-70 are perfect for dropping large game like the American bison. In fact, it became so popular to sort of kind of customize rifles around that design, and we'll show you a couple of them as the video continues. The .45-70, because of its heavy recoil impulse, this is an example of what would be known as a Springfield Armory officer's model. They also had a carbine version. This would be somewhere in the middle of the two barrel lengths of carbine and the one I originally showed you. When you were going to use the 45-70 in a shorter barreled rifle, most people found it desirable to cut the grainage down on the powder to 50 grains instead of 70. So it didn't knock you off your horse or potentially break your collarbone or shoulder. So, and a very adaptable bullet across many different types of platforms. The government had a lot of surplus rifles at their availability, one of them being the Martini platform. We'll do a video on that whole concept later on, but this is a Martini converted to 45-70 caliber. It was a sort of a complex way to do it, but because they had so many rifles, they figured why not go ahead and do it. And you'll notice that it does have some different characteristics than the Springfield Armory. The Springfield has more of a crescent butt plate. This is more straight, was inherently one of the characteristics you found with the Martini. One of the other differences is if you're into silhouette shooting at an NRA sanctioned match, they're not particularly fond of Martini conversions because it's a striker fired gun. They're sort of not big on it. Most local matches won't care. I'm sure some of you have noticed on the Martini conversion this very high riser block for the front sight. That's because the shape of the Martini stock being relatively straight, you have to put that way up in the air so it gets in line with the tang sight on the rear. So it's kind of an odd looking setup, but one of the reasons that you would do it is so that in a sense of geometry, everything kind of lines up. Most of the time, rifles like this now are equipped with the tang sights. That would have been somewhat unusual in the Old West. And one of the reasons for that was, just like now, these sights are extremely expensive and would have been perhaps out of the price range of most of the people using this rifle. Another problem with all of this is that they were fairly fragile. The Old West was not a gentle place. The means of getting around was quite violent, so it would be much more common for the rifle to be set up with conventional buckhorn sights, much like you would find on any lever action rifle made today. Now, a word, however, on the tang sights. Once you experience what your sight picture looks like using the tang and the front, these are of course from Kelly, they actually do become sort of an unmagnified scope. And the people that do, and there are people that do this, scope these rifles, typically do not do better than those that run the more conventional tang sights. The other two examples I have are what you would typically see in a long-range match, potentially long-range hunting, or what's known today are silhouette matches. This guy here, as you can tell, is a custom gun. My good friend Josh Carpenter, who's a gunsmith at Buffalo Trading Company, very, very talented young man, built this himself. It's got a Krieger match barrel, Kelly sights, of course case hardened, and he actually did the stock himself with a rubber butt plate on the end instead of the crescent. The crescent works okay, except across matches where you're shooting 50, 60, or 70 rounds. Because of the heavy recoil, it can be a bit much. So most people prefer a little bit of padding back there. This is another gorgeous guy called a Uberti high wall. And I brought him along today so you can kind of get a look at the conventional buckhorn sights. Now, the 45-70 caliber has some interesting characteristics to it. One of which, of course, as we discussed, is its incredible knockdown, but it comes at the sacrifice of being a flat shooter. It shoots a tremendous arc related to its trajectory, where if you're flat or zero at 100 yards, by the time the round travels to the 200-yard mark, it's actually dropped 13 inches. So for accuracy, and efficiency of shooting, you would typically find some sort of tang sight on the gun. Okay? So what this ladder sort of allows you to do is adjust for the elevation that you'll need at greater distances. Believe it or not, with this round I'm about to show you, this is a 540 grain cast lead projectile. This round, at 400 yards, you have to account for 200 inches of drop. You picture that. It's literally coming in like a drop of rain or some sort of small mortar round by the time it strikes the target. Later on in August, I'm going to travel up to Defiance, Ohio, and film some of the owners of these guns and actually participate in my first silhouette shoot to see how it goes. I'm told it's quite interesting. It's a very, very, very sort of complex process where you'll need a spotter and a huge challenge. So I'm looking forward to that. And of course, we'll post it after we get the video edited. So one of the reasons why you would use a 540 grain bullet as compared to 405 or something lighter is because the amount of time that the projectile's in the air, it becomes more affected by wind. So a heavier bullet actually is more stable when you're trying to calculate for the wind, which is always the trick at greater distance shooting. So as the 4570 began as an infantry round, progressed through some hunting rifles, let's say, it became also found in a very utilitarian setup, like a lever action rifle. This example here is, of course, from Marlin. Some people would call this a brush gun. Whatever you want to call it, it's an amazing weapon related to its versatility. You can certainly hunt deer with it in most states because it's straight wall, and you can kill anything on the North American continent with this guy, provided, of course, you have the right bullet and bullet design. Amazing, amazing leap forward that's still unbelievably popular today. At least a few times a year, I have the occasion to go to large banquets and what amounts to a large gun raffle. These are some of the most popular items people seek at those events. And interestingly enough, I'll try to put a picture on the video here of how all of these all of a sudden have become sort of a tactical weapons platform with rails. It's really kind of a cool setup. Wouldn't be for me, but if you're into that sort of thing, it's definitely worth a little bit of investigating, and they look absolutely sinister and totally cool. Specifics of the 4570 caliber are quite interesting. Of course, we talked about its horsepower. Back in 1873, the Army wanted at least 4-inch groups out of the 4570 at 100 yards. Now, I would think that would be quite obtainable, but they were also using black powder, and one of the inherent characteristics of the round is that the groove diameter is actually larger than the bore diameter. It's 405 at the bore, but 458 at the groove. So what people would typically do is wrap a couple of layers of cotton patch around it so it would seal up and prevent leaking. Believe it or not, people still do that at silhouette matches. They're called roll your own rounds, which I think is kind of cool. I'm hoping to witness that up in Defiance. But I would think that would be an easily obtainable margin of error. And oddly enough, they required the round to be able to hit a 6x6 foot target at 1,000 yards. You can kind of see the concept of shooting at massed formations full of soldiers kind of congregating across the field. So it was in fact used a little bit like a small artillery round, just trying to sort of lob one in on a large formation of troops. Around 1879, the Army decided that it would like to have a 500 grain projectile for 4570 for increased lethality and knockdown. To do that, they had to increase the action strength of the Trapdoor from Springfield, resulting in the model 1884. Before the days of efficient supply train, the Army even developed a thinly walled wooden billet round for the 4570 full of lead shot, so that the soldiers could feed themselves by hunting small game more efficiently. Obviously, if you hit a squirrel with a 45-70, there won't be much to eat later on. But that wooden billet turned this thing into a 49 gauge shotgun. Kind of interesting, right? The 45-70 caliber saw service with the United States military, including the Navy, all the way up until about 1892 and 1893, where it was phased out for the then supposedly superior 30-40 Krag round. That's not a huge amount of time if you look at the way service rifles stay in life now, but I think some of that can be traced back to the massive advances in technology that the world was experiencing during that same time. The Industrial Revolution was in full cry, and our ability with metallurgy and being able to more quickly mass produce quality rifles was really changing the landscape forever. Oddly enough, you can actually get the 45-70 in a revolver or pistol form. The most famous would obviously be the Thompson Contender, but you can also get it from companies like Magnum Research. I don't know how much you guys are into this sort of thing, but you can probably find some humorous videos around of people trying to shoot the 45-70 caliber out of a handgun. I've never done it, and just from watching those videos, I don't think that I ever want to. It is an impressive display of, holy crap, hold on. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this little brief dive into the history of 45-70, and we're actually going to take it out to our range and put it through a little bit of its paces with some of the varied rounds that you see on the table. We're going to shoot from a little farther back. It doesn't really do a lot of good to shoot around like this from 10 feet at our normal FBI testing, but I think you're going to see what happens when she strikes the gel block. It'll become very clear why you can pretty much hunt anything on the planet with it, up to polar bears and African dangerous big game. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'm sure I didn't cover it all. I totally enjoy some of the interactions, so don't be afraid to share your knowledge of the 45-70 so we can pass it along. And don't be afraid to like and subscribe.